The autumn chill bit through Grace Thompson's thin coat as she hurried down Michigan Avenue at 5:45 a.m. Chicago's famous skyline was still shrouded in darkness, the towering skyscrapers mere silhouettes against the navy blue sky. Most of the city remained asleep, but Grace had been awake since 4:30, her small apartment in South Side already cleaned and locked behind her. At 42, Grace's face carried the gentle lines of a woman who smiled often, despite life's hardships. Her dark skin glowed even in the dim morning light, and her eyes, deep brown and watchful, missed little of the world around her. She clutched a paper bag close to her chest, protecting it from the wind that whistled between buildings. "Morning, Frank." She nodded to the security guard at Lincoln Tower, a gleaming 70-story residential building where Chicago's elite made their homes. Frank, a burly white man with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow, barely looked up from his phone. "Morning, Grace." Mrs. Peterson called down, said you're to clean the guest bathroom again. Something about water spots. Grace's smile didn't falter. "No problem." After 16 years cleaning for the city's wealthiest families, Grace had mastered the art of invisibility. She moved through their marble foyers and designer kitchens like a ghost, present enough to dust their crystal and polish their silver, but invisible enough that conversations continued uninterrupted when she entered a room. She'd heard business deals worth millions, affairs being planned, and family secrets that would shock the society pages. But Grace's silence was part of what they paid for. The service elevator hummed as it carried her to the 65th floor. The Peterson penthouse spanned half the floor, 8,000 square feet for a family of 3. 16 years ago, when she'd first started, Mrs. Peterson had been pregnant with Elijah, now a sullen teenager who still left wet towels on his bathroom floor for Grace to pick up. Grace slipped her key into the service entrance and stepped inside. The penthouse was silent. The Petersons wouldn't rise for another 2 hours. She had time. In the sprawling chef's kitchen, she quietly set down her purse and the paper bag. She removed her coat, folded it neatly, and replaced it with the crisp black uniform Mrs. Peterson required, a modern version of a maid's outfit that still made Grace feel like a prop in someone else's performance of wealth. The refrigerator was packed with untouched leftovers from last night's dinner party. Grace carefully opened containers, examining the barely touched filet mignon, the half-eaten lobster tails, the mountain of garlic mashed potatoes that would otherwise be thrown away. With practiced efficiency, she assembled a meal in a clean container, adding the dinner rolls that would be too stale by breakfast, according to Mrs. Peterson. "What a waste," she whispered, thinking of the food pantry lines she'd stood in as a single mother raising her son Darius. Now 23 and in his first year of medical school, Darius had been her motivation through years of 4 a.m. wake-ups and aching knees from scrubbing floors. "Almost done, baby," she'd whisper on those hardest days, imagining him in a white coat instead of a uniform. Grace tucked the container into her paper bag, then began her routine. Vacuum the Persian rugs, dust the art collection, polish the fixtures in each of the 6 bathrooms, clean the water spots from the guest bathroom, twice, because Mrs. Peterson would check. By 8:30 a.m., the penthouse gleamed. Mrs. Peterson emerged from the master suite in silk pajamas, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite having just woken up. "Grace, I'm having the book club over today. Please make sure the living room is presentable." "Yes, Mrs. Peterson, I've already dusted and vacuumed in there." "And that smell? Is that cleaning product? Can you use the unscented one I bought? You know how sensitive my allergies are." "Of course, Mrs. Peterson." The morning crawled by. Grace cleaned spaces that were already clean, rearranged flowers that were perfectly arranged, and made herself scarce when Mrs. Peterson's friends arrived with their Louis Vuitton handbags and discussions about their recent trips to the Maldives. At 1:30 p.m., Grace's first shift ended. She changed back into her street clothes, collected her paper bag, and slipped out the service entrance. Her second job at the Whitman residence wouldn't start until 3 p.m. She had time for her most important task of the day. Grant Park stretched along Lake Michigan, a green oasis amid the concrete and glass. Most tourists headed to the famous bean sculpture or the fountains, but Grace's destination was a secluded bench near the park's southern edge, partially hidden by overgrown bushes and overlooked by the crowds. As she approached, she saw him, the same thin figure who had occupied that bench every day for the past 4 months. His gray beard was neatly trimmed despite his ragged clothes, and his eyes, blue as a summer sky, stared distantly at the lake. A tattered backpack and a worn wool coat were his only possessions. She had never asked his name, and he had never offered it. The first time she'd seen him, it had been raining. She'd noticed him huddled on the bench without shelter, his thin frame shivering. Without thinking, Grace had shared her umbrella and the sandwich she'd packed for herself. He'd accepted both with such quiet dignity that she'd been moved to return the next day, and the next. "Good afternoon," Grace said softly, approaching the bench. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The old man turned slowly, his movements deliberate. His face brightened with recognition, the only reaction he ever showed. He didn't speak, just nodded slightly. "I brought you something special today," Grace said, sitting beside him and opening the container. "The Petersons had some fancy dinner party last night. This is filet mignon. Probably cost more than what I make in an hour." She handed him the container and a plastic fork. His hands trembled slightly as he accepted them, but his grip was sure. She'd noticed that about him, a certain refinement in his movements that seemed at odds with his circumstances. The way he held utensils, the straight posture even while sitting on a park bench. Small details that made her wonder about his story. "My son called last night," Grace said, filling the silence as the man ate slowly, savoring each bite. "He's doing well in medical school, working so hard. I always told him, education is the one thing they can't take from you." She smiled, watching a pair of ducks land on the lake's surface. "I didn't finish college myself. Had Darius when I was 19, but he's going to be a doctor. Can you believe that? My boy." The man looked at her as she spoke, his eyes focused and intelligent. Though he never responded verbally, Grace had the distinct feeling he understood every word. There was a sensitivity in his gaze, a depth that contradicted his disheveled appearance. As he finished eating, a group of businessmen walked past, laughing loudly. They glanced at Grace and the old man, their expressions shifting from surprise to discomfort to dismissal in the span of seconds. One of them quickened his pace, clutching his leather briefcase tighter as if the old man might lunge for it. Grace was used to such reactions, to being seen and immediately categorized, judged, dismissed. The old man seemed equally unfazed. Perhaps that's why she felt a connection to him. They both knew what it was to be invisible in different ways. "I should get going," Grace said, checking her watch. "The Whitmans expect me by 3, and Mrs. Whitman gets anxious if I'm even 2 minutes late." The old man nodded, carefully closing the empty container and handing it back to her. His fingers brushed against hers, cool and papery, but gentle. "I'll see you tomorrow," Grace promised, standing up. "Take care of yourself, you hear?" As she turned to leave, she missed the way the old man's eyes followed her, alert and suddenly troubled, as if a door in his mind had briefly opened before slamming shut again. By the time she looked back with a final wave, his gaze had returned to the distant horizon of Lake Michigan, lost once more in whatever silence had claimed him. Grace hurried toward the bus stop, unaware that tomorrow's meeting would be nothing like the countless ones before it, unaware that the quiet routine she'd established with the nameless man on the bench was about to shatter her carefully ordered world. Across town, in a penthouse office with views of the same lake, a phone rang. A man in an expensive suit answered it, his knuckles whitening as he listened to the caller. "You're sure it's him?" he asked, voice tight with emotion. "After all this time?" The response made him close his eyes briefly. "Don't approach yet. Just keep watching. I'll handle this personally." He hung up and stared out at the Chicago skyline, the empire his father had built and that he now controlled. The empire that had been in chaos for months since the old man's disappearance. "We found you, Dad," he whispered to the empty room. "We finally found you." The chess pieces were in motion, though Grace Thompson, still riding the crowded bus to her next cleaning job, had no idea she was now a central player in a game of power, memory, and redemption that would change everything. Dark clouds gathered over Chicago the next afternoon, bringing the threat of an autumn storm. Grace pulled her coat tighter as she hurried through Grant Park, the paper bag clutched against her chest. Today's offering was a container of Mrs. Peterson's lobster bisque, a recipe the woman claimed came from her grandmother, but that Grace had seen the chef prepare countless times. The wind picked up, rustling the trees and sending fallen leaves dancing across the path. By the time Grace reached the secluded bench, fat raindrops had begun to fall, spotting the concrete. The old man sat in his usual place, seemingly unbothered by the worsening weather. "You'll catch your death out here," Grace said, opening her umbrella and extending it over both of them. She sat beside him, their shoulders nearly touching under the limited shelter. "I brought soup today. Perfect weather for it." The man accepted the container with a nod, his blue eyes momentarily brightening at the sight of her. His hands trembled more than usual as he removed the lid, releasing a fragrant steam that mingled with the petrichor of rain-soaked earth. My son Darius used to love days like this, Grace continued, settling into their comfortable one-sided conversation. Said the rain washed everything clean, gave the city a fresh start. She smiled at the memory. That boy could find the good in anything. The downpour intensified, drumming against her umbrella. Around them, park visitors scurried for cover, none sparing a glance for the black woman and the elderly homeless man sharing a bench in the storm. I should have brought you a raincoat, Grace said, watching him eat with the same deliberate care he always showed. Maybe tomorrow I can… Her words faltered as 3 black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up along the park's edge. In her 16 years working for Chicago's wealthy, Grace had seen enough security details to recognize one immediately. The vehicle's synchronized arrival and strategic positioning spoke of money and planning. Wonder what that's about, she murmured, more to herself than to her silent companion. 4 men emerged from the first 2 vehicles, their movements precise and coordinated. Despite their civilian clothes, dark suits that probably cost more than Grace's monthly rent, they moved with military discipline. They surveyed the area, speaking into discreet earpieces, seemingly undisturbed by the rain soaking through their expensive suits. Grace felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. Something about their focused search pattern made her instinctively move closer to the old man, as if to shield him from their gaze. The rear door of the 3rd SUV opened. A man stepped out, tall and commanding in a tailored gray suit. Unlike his security team, he carried an umbrella, which he opened with a smooth gesture before walking toward the park. Even from a distance, Grace could see his face was tense with purpose. I think we should go, she whispered, though she had nowhere to take the old man. For the first time, she realized how vulnerable he was. A man who couldn't or wouldn't speak, exposed to whatever forces were closing in on them. But it was too late. One of the security men pointed in their direction, and the group changed course, moving directly toward their bench. The old man seemed oblivious, focused on finishing his soup with the same methodical precision. Grace's heart hammered in her chest as the men approached. The leader, the one in the gray suit, walked slightly ahead of his security team. As he drew closer, Grace noticed his features: sharp cheekbones, piercing eyes, and a strong jawline partially covered by a neatly trimmed beard flecked with gray. He was perhaps 50, with an intensity about him that commanded attention. Sir, one of the security men said, we need to confirm the identification before proceeding. The man in gray didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the old man beside Grace, his expression a complex mixture of disbelief, hope, and something like fear. Excuse me, ma'am, one of the security men addressed Grace. We need to speak with this gentleman. Grace instinctively placed her hand on the old man's arm. He doesn't talk, she said, surprised by the protective edge in her voice. What do you want with him? Before anyone could answer, the man in the gray suit stepped forward. The rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead, and up close, Grace could see the red rim around his eyes. Dad, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Dad, is that really you? Grace turned to the old man, confused. To her shock, he had stopped eating and was staring at the newcomer with sudden intensity. A flicker of recognition crossed his weathered face. Sir, we've been looking for you for months, one of the security men said, relief evident in his voice. The old man set down his soup container with trembling hands. His gaze never left the man in the gray suit, who had now dropped to one knee in front of the bench, heedless of the mud staining his expensive pants. Dad, it's me, he said, his voice soft and pleading. It's Alexander, your son. Grace watched in astonishment as the old man slowly reached into his coat pocket. From it, he withdrew a gold pocket watch attached to a chain. The timepiece gleamed even in the dim, rainy light, an incongruous symbol of wealth amid his tattered clothes. The man called Alexander inhaled sharply at the sight of it. You kept it, he whispered. You remembered that much. The old man opened the watch, revealing an engraved inscription inside. He held it out toward Alexander with shaking hands. To W.H., may time be our friend, E.H. Alexander read aloud, his voice thick with emotion. Grace's mind raced to catch up with what was unfolding before her. This man, the silent figure she'd been feeding for months, wasn't a homeless person at all. Mr. Hartwell, one of the security men said respectfully, we should get you somewhere warm and dry, sir. Hartwell, the name struck Grace with sudden recognition. Hartwell Industries, the Chicago-based technology conglomerate that dominated headlines. William Hartwell, the reclusive billionaire founder who had gone missing. Nearly 6 months ago. The story had been everywhere, then nowhere, as if erased from public consciousness by the family's influence. The old man, William Hartwell, turned to Grace suddenly, his blue eyes, usually distant, now focused with startling clarity. His lips moved, forming words that seemed to require immense effort. She saved me. His voice was rough from disuse but unmistakable. Alexander Hartwell turned to Grace, seeing her, truly seeing her, for the first time. You've been helping my father? Grace nodded, still processing the revelation. I didn't know who he was, he never spoke. He seemed hungry and alone. Alexander's expression softened. What's your name? Grace Thompson. Well, Ms. Thompson, he said, standing and extending his hand. It appears my family owes you a debt we can never fully repay. The rain continued to fall around them, but Grace barely noticed. She took Alexander's hand, firm and warm despite the cold, and felt the ground shift beneath her feet. The invisible line she'd spent a lifetime navigating, the boundary between serving wealth and possessing it, suddenly blurred. William Hartwell struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the bench. When he straightened, something in his posture changed. A glimpse of the man he must have been before whatever tragedy had reduced him to silence and isolation. Would you come with us, Ms. Thompson? Alexander asked, his hand still holding hers. I think my father would be more comfortable with you present, and I have many questions. Grace looked from father to son, then at her watch. Her shift at the Whitmans would start in 30 minutes. Mrs. Whitman would be furious if she was late, but the old man, Mr. Hartwell, was looking at her with those clear blue eyes, a silent plea in them. Yes, she said, making her decision. I'll come. As the security team escorted them to the waiting vehicles, Grace sent a quick text to Mrs. Whitman explaining a family emergency. It wasn't entirely untrue. In some strange way, over these months of silent lunches, William Hartwell had become a kind of family to her, a connection formed through simple human kindness, rather than blood or obligation. She glanced back at the bench as they walked away, their bench, now empty and rain-soaked. Something told her that neither of their lives would ever be the same again. Inside the warmth of the SUV, William Hartwell sat between Grace and his son. The old man reached out and touched Grace's hand, a gesture of gratitude so simple yet profound that she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. What she couldn't know was that this moment, this simple act of recognition, was just the beginning. Across Chicago, in boardrooms and penthouses, on trading floors and in exclusive clubs, the whispers had already begun. William Hartwell has been found, and the carefully constructed narratives of power, family, and legacy that had formed in his absence were about to unravel, thread by thread. The Hartwell estate sprawled across 5 acres in Chicago's exclusive North Shore, a modernist mansion of glass, steel, and limestone hidden behind tall security gates and mature trees. As the convoy of black SUVs wound up the private drive, Grace pressed her palm against the window, taking in the manicured grounds that were larger than the entire apartment building where she lived. Father hasn't been here since. Alexander's voice trailed off. He glanced at William, who sat motionless between them, staring straight ahead. Since the incident. Grace nodded, though she had no idea what the incident might be. The Hartwells' private affairs rarely made it to the news outlets she could afford to follow. Whatever had caused William Hartwell to vanish from his life of privilege remained a mystery to her. The vehicles stopped at the entrance, where a team of staff waited with the rigid posture of people pretending not to be anxious. A distinguished older woman in a tailored suit stepped forward as Alexander helped his father from the car. Dr. Myers. Alexander nodded. He's going to need immediate medical attention. The woman's professional composure faltered for just a moment when she saw William's condition. Of course, Mr. Hartwell. We've prepared everything as you instructed. Grace hesitated by the vehicle, suddenly aware of her place in this tableau. She didn't belong in this world of private physicians and waiting staff. Her uniform was back at the Petersons, but she felt its phantom presence nonetheless, the invisible barrier between service and served. Alexander turned, noticing her uncertainty. Ms. Thompson, please. He gestured toward the entrance. Father seems to trust you, and that's something we've been lacking for a long time. Inside, the house revealed itself as a museum of modern luxury. Soaring ceilings, art pieces worth more than Grace would earn in several lifetimes, furniture that looked more sculptural than functional. Yet there was a coldness to it all, the sterility of a space designed to impress rather than comfort. A medical team whisked William away to what Alexander called the East Wing, leaving Grace alone with the sun in a vast living room overlooking Lake Michigan. The storm outside cast shifting patterns of rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Please sit," Alexander said, indicating a leather sofa that probably cost more than her car. "Can I offer you something to drink? Coffee? Something stronger?" "Coffee would be nice," Grace said, carefully perching on the edge of the sofa. "Black, please." Alexander nodded to a hovering staff member who disappeared silently. The easy authority of wealth, people vanishing and appearing according to his wishes. A world bending to his will. It was a kind of power Grace had observed for years but never possessed. "Ms. Thompson," Alexander began, sitting across from her, "I hardly know where to start. My father disappeared 6 months ago after." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "After a family tragedy. The police investigated, of course, but found nothing. We hired private investigators, security firms, offered rewards, nothing. And then today I get a call that he's been found sitting on a bench in Grant Park. I've been bringing him food for about 4 months, Grace said. Always the same bench. He never spoke, never told me his name. And you did this out of..." Alexander left the question hanging. Grace met his gaze directly. "Kindness, Mr. Hartwell. The same reason anyone helps someone in need. A flicker of something, shame perhaps, crossed Alexander's face. He was saved from responding by the return of the staff member with coffee for Grace and what appeared to be scotch for himself. "You must have questions," Alexander said after taking a considerable swallow of his drink. "It's not my place to..." "Please," Alexander interrupted. "After what you've done for my father, I think you've earned some answers." Grace wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug. "What happened to him? Why was he alone on that bench?" Alexander sighed deeply. 6 months ago, my mother, Eleanor, died unexpectedly. A stroke. They were married for 47 years. His voice tightened. Father took it hard. He became withdrawn, refused to eat, barely spoke. Then, after the funeral, he just disappeared. The security cameras showed him walking out the front gates at 3 a.m. No coat, no wallet, just gone. "I'm sorry for your loss," Grace said softly. "The police suggested he might have." Alexander couldn't finish the sentence. "When we couldn't find a body, I hired every resource available. Nothing. It was as if he'd vanished completely. And all this time he was just sitting on that bench in Grant Park," Grace mused. "Apparently so. The doctors think he experienced some kind of dissociative fugue, a psychological response to extreme trauma, memory loss, identity confusion." Alexander looked toward the hallway where his father had been taken. "The pocket watch was my mother's gift to him on their 40th anniversary. May time be our friend was their private joke. They met at a conference where both their watches stopped at exactly the same moment." Grace sipped her coffee, trying to reconcile the powerful billionaire from the business pages with the silent, vulnerable man on the park bench. "What happens now?" she asked. Before Alexander could answer, a commotion erupted from the East Wing. Raised voices, the sound of something crashing. Alexander was on his feet instantly. "He's asking for her," a woman's voice called out. "He won't let us examine him." Alexander turned to Grace, his expression pleading. "Would you?" Grace nodded, setting down her coffee and following him down the hallway. The medical suite they entered looked like a private hospital room. Monitoring equipment, examination table, medication cabinets, all in the tasteful beige and cream colors that masked its clinical purpose. William Hartwell sat on the edge of the examination table, refusing to lie down despite the medical team's entreaties. When he saw Grace, his agitation visibly subsided. "Grace," he said, the word coming with effort but clarity. "Stay." The simple word, spoken with such certainty, silenced everyone in the room. Dr. Myers exchanged a look with Alexander, who nodded. "Ms. Thompson, would you mind staying while we examine Mr. Hartwell?" the doctor asked, her tone professionally courteous but eyes calculating. "Of course," Grace said, moving to William's side. The old man's hand found hers, gripping it with surprising strength. For the next hour, Grace stood beside William as the medical team conducted their examination. His vital signs were taken, blood drawn, cognitive tests administered. Through it all, William remained silent except when directly addressed, and even then, his responses were minimal, but his hand never left Grace's. Physically, he's malnourished and dehydrated, but remarkably intact considering the circumstances, Dr. Myers informed Alexander in the corner of the room. Neurologically, it's more complex. The aphasia, his difficulty speaking, could be the result of a minor stroke, psychological trauma, or both. Will he recover? Alexander asked, voice low. It's too early to tell. The brain is resilient, but at his age, the doctor left the prognosis unfinished. I'd like to arrange for a full neurological workup at Northwestern Memorial. We have connections that can ensure complete privacy. While they spoke, Grace noticed William watching them intently. There was awareness in his eyes that belied his verbal limitations, a sharp intelligence observing and processing. I think he understands more than he can express, Grace said, drawing surprised looks from both the doctor and Alexander. What makes you say that? Dr. Myers asked, professional curiosity overriding her initial dismissiveness. The way he watches, listens. When I would talk to him in the park, he always seemed to follow what I was saying, even though he never responded. Dr. Myers approached William with renewed interest. Mr. Hartwell, can you squeeze my hand once for yes and twice for no? William complied with a single firm squeeze. Do you know who you are? One squeeze. Do you know what happened to you while you were in the park? Two squeezes. Do you remember the day you left this house? A hesitation, then two squeezes. Dr. Myers glanced at Alexander. This is actually quite promising. He's oriented to his identity, even if there are memory gaps. The examination continued, revealing a complex picture. William Hartwell knew who he was, recognized his son, but had significant memory lapses around the time of his disappearance. His speech difficulties seemed to frustrate him more than anything else. Eventually, Dr. Myers declared they had done enough for one day. He needs rest, proper nutrition, and a familiar environment. I'll leave instructions for his care and return tomorrow with the neurological specialist. As the medical team packed up their equipment, Alexander pulled Grace aside. Ms. Thompson, I know this is an unusual request, but would you consider staying? Just for tonight. Father seems calmer with you present. Grace thought of her responsibilities, her early shift at the Petersons tomorrow, her small apartment with bills waiting to be paid, her son who would be calling for their weekly check-in. I understand it's an imposition, Alexander cut in. You'd be compensated generously, of course, and I can arrange for any obligations to be covered. The ease with which he assumed money could solve any problem, the hallmark of a man who had never lacked it. Before Grace could respond, William appeared at Alexander's side, having somehow crossed the room without assistance. He looked at Grace, then at his son. Grace stays. The two words emerged with effort but absolute clarity. Alexander and Grace exchanged glances, his pleading, hers uncertain. I need to make some calls, Grace finally said. Let people know where I am. Alexander's relief was palpable. Of course. Use any phone, take all the time you need. I'll have a guest suite prepared. As Alexander stepped away to give instructions to his staff, William's hand found Grace's again. His blue eyes, clearer now than they'd been on the park bench, held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Thank you, he said, each syllable deliberate. You're welcome, Mr. Hartwell. He shook his head slowly. William. Grace smiled despite herself. William. Later, after William had been settled in his bedroom with a night nurse monitoring him, Grace stood at the window of a guest suite larger than her entire apartment. She had called Mrs. Peterson and Mrs. Whitman, inventing a family emergency that would keep her away for at least a day. Both had been annoyed, Mrs. Peterson threatening to replace her if it happened again. Grace stared out at the rain-lashed lake, the distant lights of downtown Chicago blurred by weather and distance. In her hand, she held her phone, Darius's concerned voice still echoing in her mind. Mom, are you sure everything's okay? This doesn't sound like you. Everything's fine, baby, she had assured him. Just something unexpected. I'll explain later. But how could she explain this? The strange twist of fate that had connected her to one of the wealthiest men in Chicago. The feeling that she had stumbled into a story much larger and more complex than a simple act of kindness. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Alexander stood there, looking exhausted, but more relaxed than earlier. Ms. Thompson. Grace, if I may. I wanted to thank you properly. He held out an envelope. This is just a small token of appreciation for what you've done for my father. Grace took the envelope without opening it. That's not necessary, Mr. Hartwell. Alexander, please. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. And yes, it is necessary. What isn't necessary is for you to return to your previous employment. Grace stiffened. Excuse me? I've been making some calls, learning about you. 16 years cleaning for families who didn't even know your last name. A son in medical school at Northwestern. Quite the accomplishment. I'm proud of my work, Grace said, her voice cool. "And prouder of my son." Alexander had the grace to look chastened. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise. I'm simply suggesting that things could be different for you now. Because I helped your father, because he trusts you, and that's something in very short supply in our world." Alexander stepped closer, his voice dropping. "There are things about my father's disappearance, complications that I haven't shared. The truth is, Ms. Thompson, I may need your help again, and I'm prepared to make it worth your while." The implications hung in the air between them. Grace thought of her son's medical school tuition, the second job she'd taken to help pay for it, the constant calculation of which bill could wait another week. "I should get some rest," she said finally. "It's been a long day." Alexander nodded, accepting the deflection. "Of course, we'll talk more tomorrow." He turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. My sister Victoria arrives from New York in the morning. She can be intense. Don't take it personally." With that cryptic warning, he left Grace alone with her thoughts and an unopened envelope that promised to change everything. Grace woke to unfamiliar luxury: Egyptian cotton sheets, a mattress that seemed to cradle her body perfectly, and sunlight filtering through automated blinds that had begun their programmed ascent at precisely 7 a.m. For a disorienting moment, she forgot where she was. Then yesterday's events crashed back into her consciousness. The rain, the black SUVs, William Hartwell's trembling hand holding a gold pocket watch. She showered in a bathroom larger than her bedroom at home, the multiple shower heads and digital temperature controls requiring a moment's study before she mastered them. The closet held a selection of women's clothing in approximately her size, a detail that spoke to Alexander Hartwell's efficiency and resources. After a moment's hesitation, Grace selected the simplest outfit: dark slacks and a cream blouse that wouldn't have looked out of place at an office. Downstairs, the house hummed with quiet activity. Staff moved purposefully through hallways, security personnel communicated in hushed tones over earpieces, and medical equipment was being carried toward the east wing. Grace followed the scent of coffee to the kitchen, a gleaming expanse of professional-grade appliances and marble surfaces, where a chef and two assistants worked on what appeared to be breakfast. "Ms. Thompson," the chef acknowledged her with a nod. "Mr. Hartwell said you'd be joining them for breakfast in the solarium." "Coffee?" "Please," Grace said, accepting the offered cup. "How is Mr. Hartwell, William, this morning?" The chef exchanged glances with his assistants. "It's not my place to say, ma'am." The response was familiar to Grace, the careful neutrality of service staff, navigating the complex politics of wealthy households. She had worn that same expression countless times herself. "The solarium?" she asked after sipping the perfectly brewed coffee. "Through the main hall, past the gallery, glass doors on your right," the chef directed. "Mr. Alexander and Ms. Victoria are already there." Grace thanked him and made her way through the house, noting how the art on the walls transitioned from contemporary abstracts to historical landscapes as she approached the older part of the mansion. The solarium proved to be a breathtaking glass-enclosed space overlooking the lake, filled with tropical plants and wicker furniture that gave it the feeling of a perpetual summer. Alexander Hartwell sat at a glass table, engrossed in conversation with a woman whose sharp profile and commanding presence identified her instantly as his sister. Victoria Hartwell had her father's striking blue eyes, but where William's had been gentle even in confusion, hers were calculating and cold. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe style that emphasized her high cheekbones and the expensive cut of her tailored suit. Alexander noticed Grace first. "Ah, Grace, good morning. Please join us." He stood, gesturing to an empty chair. "This is my sister, Victoria. Victoria, this is Grace Thompson, the woman who's been helping Father all these months." Victoria's gaze assessed Grace with the dispassionate efficiency of someone appraising property. "Miss Thompson," she said, not rising, "my brother tells me we owe you a debt of gratitude." "I just did what anyone would do," Grace replied, taking the offered seat. "I assure you, not anyone would spend months feeding a homeless man with no expectation of reward," Victoria said, her tone making it unclear whether this was compliment or suspicion. Quite the coincidence that the homeless man turned out to be one of Chicago's wealthiest citizens. "Victoria," Alexander warned. "It's a fair observation," Victoria countered. "You'll forgive my caution, Ms. Thompson, but our family has dealt with its share of opportunists." Grace met Victoria's stare directly. "I understand your concern, Ms. Hartwell, but I didn't know who your father was until yesterday, and I wasn't looking for rewards." Before Victoria could respond, the solarium doors opened, and William Hartwell entered, assisted by a nurse who discreetly retreated once he was seated. He looked markedly better than the day before, clean-shaven, dressed in expensive casual clothing, his silver hair neatly combed. The physical transformation emphasized the wealth and position he had temporarily lost, but his eyes still held that same distant quality Grace recognized from their park bench meetings. "Father." Victoria's demeanor softened instantly as she rose to kiss his cheek. "You're looking better already." William nodded, his gaze finding Grace. A small smile curved his lips. "Good morning, Mr. Hartwell," Grace said. "William," he corrected, his voice stronger than yesterday though still halting. "Always. William." "Father insisted on joining us," Alexander explained, though Dr. Myers recommended another day of rest. Breakfast was served by silent staff, a spread of fresh fruit, pastries, eggs prepared 3 ways, and smoked salmon. Grace watched as Victoria cut her father's food into manageable pieces, a gesture both tender and controlling. "The board is meeting at 11, Victoria informed her brother. "They're expecting an update on father's condition and plans for interim leadership." Alexander tensed. "We've hardly had time to—" "Markets don't run on sentiment, Alexander," Victoria cut in. "Hartwell Industries has been in limbo for 6 months. The uncertainty is affecting stock prices, partner confidence, acquisition strategies." William watched this exchange with surprising focus. His fork paused midway to his mouth. "And what exactly do you propose we tell them?" Alexander challenged. "That father's back but unable to resume leadership? That we'll continue the co-CEO arrangement that's had us deadlocked for months? I propose we tell them that I'll be assuming full control as CEO, with your support as COO," Victoria said smoothly. "The arrangement we discussed in New York last month." Alexander's face flushed. That discussion was theoretical, based on the assumption that father might never— "Board," William interrupted, his voice strained but clear. All eyes turned to him. "I'll see, board." Victoria recovered first. "Father, that's not necessary. Your health—" "My company," William insisted, each word deliberate. "My decision." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Grace felt acutely out of place witnessing what was clearly a long-brewing power struggle. "Perhaps I should give you privacy for this discussion," she suggested, beginning to rise. "No." William's hand shot out, catching her wrist with surprising strength. "Stay." Victoria's eyes narrowed at the gesture. "Father, Ms. Thompson doesn't need to be involved in family business matters." William looked directly at his daughter, a flash of his former authority surfacing. "Trust her. You barely know her," Victoria protested. "Months," William countered. "Every day. Kindness. No. Agenda." He turned to Grace. "Unlike some." The implication hung in the air, charging the atmosphere with tension. Alexander cleared his throat. "Victoria, father obviously feels comfortable with Grace present, and after what she's done for him, I think she's earned some consideration." Victoria's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue further. The remainder of breakfast passed in strained conversation about William's medical prognosis, the investigation into his disappearance, and the mechanics of reintegrating him into public life. As staff cleared the dishes, Alexander's phone buzzed. He checked it, frowning. "The detective is here to take father's statement." "Already?" Victoria objected. "We haven't prepared—" "It's a missing persons case, Victoria," Alexander said wearily. "They need to close their file, and there will be questions about those 6 months. Better to establish the official narrative now." The word narrative sent a chill through Grace. It suggested a story crafted for consumption rather than truth. Detective Michael Reyes of the Chicago Police Department had the weathered look of a man who had seen too much of human nature's darker side to be impressed by wealth or status. He greeted the Hartwells with professional courtesy, but reserved a warmer smile for Grace after introductions were made. "Mrs. Thompson, right? I think your son Darius was in my nephew's class at Westside High." "That's right," Grace confirmed, surprised at the connection. "Darius spoke highly of your nephew. He's at University of Illinois now?" "Medical school at Johns Hopkins," Reyes said proudly. "Following in your son's footsteps, it seems." Victoria cleared her throat pointedly. "Detective, we're on a rather tight schedule today." Reyes's expression cooled. "Of course, Ms. Hartwell. I'll try to be brief." He turned to William. "Mr. Hartwell, I understand your communication is limited, so I'll keep my questions simple. Do you remember leaving your home 6 months ago?" William's brow furrowed. "No." "Do you remember how you came to be in Grant Park?" "No." Were you abducted or held against your will at any point? No, don't think so. Reyes made notes. Medical evaluation suggests you experienced a dissociative fugue state, potentially triggered by grief. Does that align with your understanding? William nodded. Have you had any contact with anyone who might have recognized you during these 6 months? At this, William hesitated, glancing at Grace. Only her. Reyes followed his gaze. Mrs. Thompson, when did you first encounter Mr. Hartwell? About 4 months ago, Grace explained. In Grant Park. He was sitting alone on a bench, looking lost. I shared my lunch with him. After that, I made a point to bring him food whenever I could. And you didn't recognize him as William Hartwell? His disappearance was major news. I don't follow business news much, Detective, Grace said simply. And he looked very different than the few pictures I might have seen. Thinner, unshaven. Reyes studied her for a moment, then nodded. Mr. Hartwell, do you remember anything about where you slept? How you survived before Mrs. Thompson began helping you? William shook his head, frustration evident. Fragments only. The detective continued his questioning, but it became increasingly clear that William's memory of those 6 months existed only in scattered pieces. The medical explanation, dissociative fugue, seemed to satisfy Reyes's professional curiosity, though Grace noticed he paid particular attention to Victoria's reactions throughout the interview. Just one more question, Reyes said finally. Mr. Hartwell, the night you disappeared, security footage shows you leaving through the front gates at 3:17 a.m. You were carrying nothing but wearing your watch. Do you remember why you left? William's face clouded, his hands beginning to tremble. Eleanor, he whispered, looking for Eleanor. Alexander placed a steadying hand on his father's shoulder. My mother had passed away 2 weeks earlier, Detective. Father was. Not himself. Reyes nodded sympathetically. That concludes my official questions. The department will consider this case closed, though there may be follow-up paperwork. He hesitated, then added, Off the record, Mr. Hartwell, you might want to look into the timing of your disappearance relative to certain corporate filings with the SEC. Might be nothing, but interesting coincidence. Victoria stood abruptly. Thank you for your time, Detective. Alexander will see you out. After Reyes left, the atmosphere in the solarium grew heavier. William appeared exhausted by the questioning, his brief surge of strength fading. Father should rest before the board meeting, Victoria said, her tone brooking no argument. She signaled to the waiting nurse who approached to assist William. Grace, William said, resisting the nurse's gentle guidance. Come, board meeting. Victoria's expression hardened. Father, Ms. Thompson has no place at a Hartwell Industries board meeting. There are confidentiality concerns, not to mention my company. William interrupted with unexpected force. My guest. The siblings exchanged glances. Alexander's concerned. Victoria's calculating. Perhaps it would be better to have someone Father trusts present, Alexander suggested cautiously, for his comfort. Victoria's eyes narrowed, but she conceded with cold precision. Fine, but Ms. Thompson will need to sign extensive non-disclosure agreements before she sets foot in our headquarters. After William was escorted to rest before the meeting, Grace found herself alone with the Hartwell siblings in the suddenly tense solarium. I don't need to attend, she offered. I understand this is a private family matter. Apparently my father disagrees, Victoria said, her tone icy. Tell me, Ms. Thompson, what exactly are your intentions here? Grace met her gaze steadily. My intention was to help someone in need. Now that he's home, my intention is to ensure he's okay, then return to my life. Your life, Victoria repeated. 2 cleaning jobs, an apartment in South Side, a son with medical school debt. At Grace's surprised expression, she smiled thinly. We had you thoroughly vetted overnight. Victoria, Alexander warned. No, it's important we understand each other, Victoria continued. Ms. Thompson, I don't believe in coincidences. A woman in financial need happens to befriend one of Chicago's wealthiest men during his most vulnerable period. Now he insists on your presence during private family and business matters. You think I'm manipulating your father? Grace asked incredulously. I think 6 months alone, possibly with cognitive impairment, makes anyone susceptible to manipulation, Victoria replied. Intentional or otherwise. Alexander stepped forward. That's enough, Victoria. Grace has done nothing but help Father when no one else could find him. She deserves our gratitude, not suspicion. Victoria turned to her brother. Your naivety would be charming if it weren't so dangerous. Father is not himself. His insistence on this woman's presence, a complete stranger, should concern you. I'm not a stranger to him, Grace said quietly. For 4 months I was the only person who spoke to him, who treated him like a human being rather than an inconvenience or an oddity. Maybe that's why he trusts me. Victoria studied Grace for a long moment. Sign the NDAs, attend the meeting, but understand that my father's company, his legacy, is my primary concern. If I believe for one moment that your influence is harming him or Hartwell Industries, I will act accordingly. With that parting threat, Victoria exited the solarium, leaving Grace alone with Alexander. I apologize for my sister, he said, running a hand through his hair. She's been under tremendous pressure these past months. We both have. She's protective of your father and the company, Grace acknowledged. I understand that. Alexander sighed. Victoria has always been father's heir apparent. Brilliant, driven, ruthless when necessary. I was the surprise second child who preferred architecture to acquisitions. Father indulged my interests, but the company was always meant for Victoria. And now everything's uncertain. Father's condition, the future leadership, even some of the decisions made during his absence. Alexander trailed off, seeming to remember who he was speaking to. The important thing is Father's recovery. If having you there helps him, then that's what matters. Grace nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being drawn into currents far deeper and more treacherous than she had imagined. The simple act of kindness that had connected her to William Hartwell now seemed to be entangling her in a web of family politics and corporate intrigue she was ill-equipped to navigate. The car will be ready in an hour, Alexander said, checking his watch. I'll have someone bring you the paperwork Victoria mentioned. After he left, Grace walked to the glass walls of the solarium, gazing out at Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. The water was calm today, belying the storm that had brought such dramatic change to her life just 24 hours ago. She thought of her son, of the bills waiting in her apartment, of Mrs. Peterson, who had threatened to replace her if she didn't return soon. The practical concerns of her life hadn't disappeared, even as she stood in this palace of privilege. And yet, something deeper than practicality kept her here. The memory of William Hartwell's blue eyes, clear and trusting, finding hers across a rain-soaked park bench. She saved me, he had said. Such simple words to carry such weight. Grace pulled the envelope Alexander had given her from her pocket, finally opening it. Inside was a check with more zeros than she had ever seen, made out in her name. The amount would cover Darius's remaining medical school tuition and then some. She stared at it for a long moment, thinking of Victoria's suspicions, of the detective's questions, of William's fractured memories. Something about this situation felt unfinished, like a puzzle with crucial pieces still missing. The right thing would be to return the check, to extricate herself from this wealthy family's drama. And yet as she tucked the check back into the envelope without deciding, Grace knew she would be sitting beside William Hartwell at the board meeting in an hour. Not for the money, but because somewhere in those missing 6 months, in those silent park bench meetings, a bond had formed that she couldn't easily dismiss. What she couldn't possibly know was how that bond would soon shake the foundations of one of Chicago's most powerful families, exposing secrets that had been buried long before William Hartwell ever sat on that park bench in the rain. The Hartwell Industries headquarters dominated Chicago's business district. 60 stories of glass and steel designed by renowned architects to project innovation and permanence. As the private elevator ascended toward the executive floor, Grace stood beside William Hartwell, conscious of Victoria's scrutiny from the opposite corner. Alexander checked his phone continuously, the tension in his shoulders betraying his anxiety about the impending board meeting. Grace had signed the confidentiality agreements without reading all the legal jargon, a decision that might have been unwise but felt necessary in the moment. She was here for William, not for corporate secrets or financial gain. The elderly billionaire had insisted on walking into the building himself, rather than using the wheelchair Dr. Myers had recommended, but now his hand gripped the elevator rail with whitening knuckles. "Are you sure about this?" Grace asked him quietly. William nodded, his gaze steady despite his physical fatigue. "Need to. See them. Their faces." The cryptic response raised questions Grace couldn't ask with Victoria watching so intently. The elevator doors opened to reveal an executive floor that hummed with controlled chaos. Assistants froze mid-stride at the sight of William Hartwell, their shock quickly masked by professional composure. News of the founder's return had clearly spread, but seeing him in person, diminished yet unmistakably present, seemed to electrify the atmosphere. Mr. Hartwell, an elegant older woman, approached, emotion breaking through her professional demeanor. "Thank God you're all right." "Margaret," William acknowledged with a nod. "Good. See you." "Margaret has been Father's executive assistant for 27 years, Alexander explained to Grace. "She's practically family." Margaret's eyes lingered on Grace with undisguised curiosity, but she maintained her composure. "The board is assembled in the main conference room. Everyone's here." "Everyone?" Victoria asked sharply. Margaret nodded. "All 12 members, including Mr. Richardson." Something unspoken passed between Victoria and Alexander at this news. William, noticing the exchange, frowned slightly. "Richardson," he said, the name clearly holding significance. "Edward Richardson joined the board 3 months ago, Father," Alexander explained carefully. "After Bradley retired." William's expression darkened. "Not approved." "It was an emergency appointment," Victoria interjected smoothly. "During your absence, we needed financial expertise. Mr. Richardson's banking connections have been invaluable." William said nothing more, but Grace noted how his jaw tightened. As they approached the conference room, he slowed his pace, squaring his shoulders and lifting his chin, a man preparing for battle rather than a business meeting. The boardroom fell silent as William Hartwell entered, leaning slightly on Alexander's arm. 12 men and women in expensive suits rose from their seats around a massive table, their expressions ranging from shock to calculation to what looked suspiciously like disappointment. Grace, entering behind the Hartwell family, felt immediately out of place among these power brokers, despite the borrowed designer clothes. "William," a silver-haired man stepped forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "This is an extraordinary surprise. We're all delighted to see you recovered." "James," William acknowledged the man with a curt nod. His gaze traveled around the table, assessing each face with unexpected sharpness. When his eyes landed on a younger man with a meticulously groomed beard and an English-cut suit, they narrowed slightly. "Richardson." Edward Richardson inclined his head with practiced deference. "Mr. Hartwell, an honor to finally meet you. Your company has been in capable hands during your absence, I assure you." "My company," William emphasized, each word careful and deliberate. "My board." An uncomfortable silence followed this assertion. Victoria stepped forward smoothly. "Perhaps we should begin the meeting officially. Father, would you like to address the board? Or would you prefer Alexander or myself to update everyone on the situation?" William moved to the head of the table, the chair that had presumably remained empty during his absence. "I'll speak." As everyone settled into their seats, William gestured for Grace to take the chair beside him, a move that raised eyebrows around the table. Victoria, forced to sit further down, made no effort to hide her displeasure. "For those who don't know," Alexander announced, "this is Grace Thompson, who has been instrumental in helping our father. Father has asked her to be present today." Grace felt the weight of 12 calculating stares. These were people accustomed to assessing assets and liabilities, and she had no illusion about which category they were placing her in. William Hartwell surveyed the assembled board members, his frail appearance belied by the authority in his gaze. When he spoke, his words were measured and deliberate, each one chosen with care to compensate for his limited speech. 6 months, gone, memory, fragmented, but mind, clearing. He paused, gathering strength. "Grace, found me, helped when no one else." He let the implication hang in the air. "Now I return. Questions?" James Harrington, the silver-haired man who had first greeted William, leaned forward. "William, we're all relieved by your recovery, but perhaps this discussion would be better conducted after you've had more time to regain your strength. The company has maintained stability in your absence thanks to Victoria and Alexander's leadership." "Stability," William repeated, the word carrying a weight of skepticism. "Show me quarterly reports, all decisions since March." Victoria tensed visibly. "Father, that's an extensive amount of information. Dr. Myers cautioned against overwhelming you with complex business matters so soon." "My company," William insisted. "My right," Alexander intervened smoothly. "I had Margaret prepare a condensed summary of major decisions and financial performance." He slid a tablet toward his father. "Perhaps we could focus on the most significant items today." William accepted the tablet, his eyes suddenly sharp as he began scrolling through the information. For someone who had spent months as a seemingly disconnected figure on a park bench, his focus and comprehension were remarkable. Grace watched as his expression darkened progressively. "Northside Development," he said finally, looking up. "Cancelled." A tense silence fell over the room. Edward Richardson cleared his throat. "The Northside Community Development Project was deemed financially untenable, Mr. Hartwell. The projected ROI didn't justify the capital expenditure, especially given market uncertainties during your absence. My project, William countered, anger giving strength to his voice. 20 years. Planning. Not about ROI. Victoria leaned forward. Father, the board has a fiduciary responsibility. The Northside project would have tied up significant capital in a low-income area with minimal returns. We redirected those funds to the River North luxury development, which is already showing a 20% return on investment. William's hands curled into fists on the table. Northside. Promise. To Eleanor. The mention of his late wife sent a ripple through the room. Alexander shifted uncomfortably. Father, we didn't know the project held personal significance. We made the best business decision with the information we had. Family legacy, William insisted. Not just business. Just. Grace watched the interplay of power and emotion around the table. Whatever this Northside project was, its cancellation clearly struck at something deeply personal for William. She also noted how several board members exchanged glances at the mention of his wife's name, meaningful looks that suggested layers of context she couldn't interpret. Edward Richardson adopted a conciliatory tone. Perhaps we could revisit the Northside project, Mr. Hartwell. A scaled version might be viable with the right financing structure. No, William said firmly. Original plan, full commitment. That would require unwinding several investments made in the interim, Richardson countered smoothly. The River North project is already under construction. Contractors engaged, materials purchased. William's gaze hardened. Find a way. James Harrington intervened with practiced diplomacy. William, while we're all delighted by your recovery, there is the question of corporate leadership during this transition period. Given your medical condition, I'm here. William cut him off. Not dead. Of course not. Harrington backpedaled. But rehabilitation takes time. The markets require stability, certainty. Victoria seized the opening. Father, Alexander and I have managed effectively as co-CEOs during your absence. For continuity, I propose we maintain that arrangement while you focus on your recovery, with you returning to the role of chairman. William's eyes narrowed. Co-CEOs. Never approved. It was an emergency measure, Alexander explained. The board voted unanimously given the circumstances. 7-5. William corrected unexpectedly, his gaze moving around the table with surprising accuracy. Not unanimous. A startled silence followed this pronouncement. Grace watched as several board members shifted uncomfortably under William's scrutiny. How could he know the voting breakdown of a decision made during his absence? Father, Victoria said carefully, how did you know about the board vote? William tapped his temple. Memory, returning, fragments. He turned to Richardson. You, banker, financed River North? Richardson nodded cautiously. My institution provided favorable terms, yes. After. Board seat? The implication hung in the air. A quid pro quo that no one had voiced explicitly. Richardson maintained his composure, but a slight coloring of his neck betrayed discomfort. The timing was coincidental, Mr. Hartwell. My financial expertise was needed during an uncertain period. William turned to his daughter. Victoria, always. Ambitious. Despite his halting speech, the words carried a weight that silenced the room. But Eleanor's projects. Sacred. You knew. Victoria's composure cracked slightly. Father, every decision was made in the best interest of Hartwell Industries. Sentiment can't drive business strategy. Not sentiment, William countered. Promise. Commitment. Values. His hand found Grace's under the table, squeezing it for support. Like Grace. Helping stranger. No profit. Just right thing. Grace felt the weight of every stare in the room. She represented something in this corporate battlefield, a moral counterpoint to cold calculations, a reminder of values beyond profit margins. It was a role she hadn't asked for but couldn't deny. With respect, Mr. Hartwell, Richardson said, his tone carefully measured. Ms. Thompson's admirable charity is a personal matter. Corporate governance requires objective financial assessment. The Northside project simply didn't meet those criteria. William's gaze hardened. Numbers. Manipulated. Know this. He turned to the board. Full audit, all decisions, 6 months. James Harrington cleared his throat. William, I'm not sure that's... Not asking. William interrupted. Telling. Alexander, sensing the escalating tension, intervened. A review of major decisions seems reasonable. In the meantime, perhaps we should discuss the immediate leadership transition. Father, What structure would you prefer while you continue your recovery? William considered the question, his eyes moving between his children. I resume. Chairman. Alexander. CEO. He paused, his gaze settling on Victoria. Victoria, step down. Temporary. The pronouncement fell like a thunderbolt. Victoria's face drained of color. Father, you can't be serious. I've dedicated my life to this company. Alexander doesn't even want Northside. William interrupted, his voice stronger than it had been all day. Priorities wrong. Values lost. Victoria's control finally slipped. This is about Mother's pet project? A money-losing community development in a neighborhood beyond salvation? That's why you're punishing me? Not punishment, William said quietly. Correction. The boardroom fell into uncomfortable silence. Grace felt acutely aware of her outsider status in this family drama that had spilled into corporate governance. Yet William's hand remained firmly clasped around hers, as if drawing strength from the connection. Edward Richardson broke the silence with practiced smoothness. Perhaps a compromise is in order. Victoria has demonstrated considerable leadership during this difficult period. Maybe a co-leadership structure with clear domains. No. William cut him off. Decision made. He turned to the board at large. Vote. Now. James Harrington sighed heavily. William, while you remain majority shareholder, proper governance requires vote, William repeated, his tone brooking no argument. The subsequent vote revealed the shifting power dynamics in stark relief. 8 board members aligned with William's proposal, while 4, including Richardson, sided with Victoria. The outcome was clear. Alexander would become CEO, Victoria would step down temporarily, and William would resume his role as chairman during his recovery. Victoria sat rigid in her chair, her expression a careful mask. I see how quickly loyalty shifts, she said, her voice controlled despite the evident emotion. I hope you all remember who kept this company profitable during the darkest 6 months of its existence. Victoria, Alexander began, looking uncomfortable with his unexpected promotion. Don't, she cut him off. Just don't, Alexander. She turned to their father. This isn't over. When your memory fully returns, if it returns, you'll regret this decision. With that parting shot, she gathered her papers and left the boardroom, her departure leaving a charged silence in its wake. William watched her go, his expression complex. Sadness mingled with resolve. Necessary, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. The meeting concluded shortly afterward, the remaining business conducted with an efficiency born of collective discomfort. As board members filed out, many stopped to welcome William back with carefully constructed pleasantries that couldn't fully mask their uncertainty about the power shift they had just witnessed. When only William, Alexander, and Grace remained, William seemed to deflate, the strength that had carried him through the confrontation evaporating. Father, are you all right? Alexander asked, concerned. William nodded wearily. Tired. Need rest. I'll have the car brought around, Alexander said, stepping away to make arrangements. Alone with Grace, William turned to her with unexpected clarity in his eyes. Thank you. Being here. I didn't do anything, Grace said honestly. Did everything, William countered. Witnessed. Truth needs witnesses. Grace considered his words. The Northside project? It was important to your wife? William nodded, grief momentarily overwhelming his features. Eleanor's heart. Community center. Housing. Medical clinic. Jobs. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Not charity. Investment. In people. Victoria never. Understood. And that's why you removed her as CEO? Part reason, William said cryptically. Other reasons. Coming clear. Memory like puzzle. Pieces returning. He looked toward the door where his daughter had exited. Victoria, brilliant but cold. Like her grandfather. Business first. People. Distant second. She loves you, Grace observed. In her way. Loves power more, William said with unexpected sharpness. Alexander, different. Heart like Eleanor. Sees people. Grace thought about the siblings. Victoria's cutting efficiency. Alexander's quieter, more empathetic approach. Will they reconcile? After this? William shrugged slightly. Family complicated, business more so. He squeezed her hand again. Need your help. Still, if willing. What kind of help? William's expression grew distant, troubled. Memory returning, but gaps remain. Important gaps. He looked directly into her eyes. Trust you. No agenda. Before Grace could respond, Alexander returned. "The car is ready, Father. Dr. Myers is waiting at the house to check on you after this exertion." As they made their way back to the elevator, Grace became aware of eyes following their progress. Executives and assistants watching the frail founder who had just upended the corporate hierarchy with a few halting sentences. The power he still wielded despite his condition was palpable. In the car, William dozed, exhausted by the confrontation. Alexander watched his father with a mixture of concern and confusion. "I never wanted this," he confessed quietly to Grace. "The CEO position. It was always Victoria's dream, not mine." "Why did he choose you then?" Grace asked. Alexander sighed. "I wish I knew. Father and I have always been close, but Victoria was his business heir. She has the ruthlessness needed in this industry." He glanced at his sleeping father. Something's changed in him. Or perhaps something's been revealed that was always there. "The Northside project seems to be a breaking point," Grace observed. "It was Mother's passion project," Alexander explained. "A comprehensive urban renewal initiative in one of Chicago's most neglected neighborhoods. Affordable housing, community spaces, job training facilities, a health clinic. Far more ambitious than typical corporate social responsibility efforts. Not profitable, not in conventional terms. Mother always argued that there are different kinds of profit: social capital, community goodwill, long-term economic development. Father supported it because he could never deny her anything." Alexander's expression softened. They had one of those rare marriages where each made the other better. Her compassion tempered his business instincts. His practicality gave structure to her idealism. Grace thought about the gold pocket watch, the inscription about time being their friend. He really loved her. "Completely," Alexander confirmed. "After she died, he just broke. We all did in different ways. Victoria threw herself into work. I retreated into myself and Father." He looked at the sleeping man beside him. Father simply disappeared, in more ways than one. The car pulled through the gates of the Hartwell estate, where Dr. Myers waited as promised. William was gently awakened and escorted inside for his examination, leaving Grace and Alexander in the vast foyer. "What happens now?" Grace asked. "Corporate restructuring, press releases explaining Father's return, damage control with key investors," Alexander listed mechanically. "And somehow I have to step into a role I never wanted without completely alienating my sister." "I meant with your father," Grace clarified. "His recovery." Alexander ran a hand through his hair. "Dr. Myers says it could take months for his memory to fully return. If it ever does completely, the speech difficulties may improve with therapy, but at his age." He left the prognosis unfinished. "The remarkable thing is how clear his thinking remains despite everything. Did you notice how he knew the exact board vote count for a decision made during his absence?" Grace had indeed noticed. Could someone have told him? Who? "He's been living on a park bench for months, apparently." Alexander shook his head. "It's as if parts of his mind remained connected to his life even while he was disconnected from it physically." A staff member approached, informing Alexander that Victoria had returned to the house and was requesting access to William's private study. "Tell her Father's resting and the study remains closed as per his instructions," Alexander replied, his tone suggesting this wasn't the first such request. After the staff member departed, he explained, "Father's study has been locked since his disappearance. Only he has the access codes. Victoria doesn't have access? No one does. It was Father's private domain. His personal records, research, correspondence with Mother. He was always protective of it, even before." Alexander gestured vaguely, encompassing the strange circumstances of the past 6 months. Grace considered this information. "Why would Victoria want access now?" "She claims there are documents she needs for ongoing business matters," Alexander said, his tone suggesting skepticism. "But Father's business files are all digitized and accessible through corporate servers. Whatever's in that study is personal." The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Myers, who emerged from the East Wing looking concerned. "Mr. Hartwell is asking for Ms. Thompson," she informed them. "He's quite agitated." Alexander and Grace followed the doctor to William's suite, where they found him sitting up in bed, more alert than his exhaustion should have allowed. "Grace," he said upon seeing her, "need to show you something." Dr. Myers frowned. "Mr. Hartwell, you need rest. Your vitals show elevated stress levels after today's exertions." William ignored her, focusing entirely on Grace. "Important. Tonight." Alexander stepped forward. "Father, whatever it is can wait until tomorrow when you're stronger." "No," William insisted with surprising force. "Tonight? Midnight. My study. He turned to his son. Alexander, too. What about Victoria? Alexander asked. William's expression darkened. Not Victoria. Not yet. His gaze returned to Grace, intense and pleading. Will you come? Grace thought about the NDA she had signed, about Victoria's suspicions, about the invisible threads drawing her deeper into this wealthy family's complicated dynamics. The practical voice in her mind told her to step away, to return to her predictable life of early mornings and sore knees and quiet pride in her son's achievements. But the look in William Hartwell's eyes, the trust, the urgency, the fear, made such practicality impossible. I'll be there, she promised. Later, as Grace sat in her guest suite watching night fall over Lake Michigan, she thought about how completely her life had changed in just 2 days. From invisible maid to boardroom confidant, from feeding a homeless man to being drawn into what increasingly felt like a high-stakes family drama with corporate implications. Her phone buzzed with a text from Darius. Everything okay, Mom? This family emergency feels off. Her son had always been perceptive. Grace started to type a reassuring response, then stopped. How could she explain what was happening when she barely understood it herself? How could she tell him that the quiet, dignified woman who had raised him to believe in honest work and modest ambitions was now sitting in a mansion, holding secrets that could affect one of Chicago's wealthiest families? All fine, she wrote back. We'll explain soon. Love you. As midnight approached, Grace changed from the borrowed nightclothes back into her day outfit. Whatever William Hartwell wanted to show her in his private study, she sensed it would change everything yet again, completing a transformation that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a rainy afternoon. What she couldn't possibly know was how the contents of that study would not only reshape her understanding of the Hartwell family, but place her at the center of a moral choice that would test everything she believed about wealth, power, justice, and redemption. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed midnight as Grace approached William's study. Alexander waited outside the ornate double doors, his expression tense. Father's already inside, he whispered. He insisted on going alone first. Grace nodded, noting the biometric scanner beside the door. Has he told you what this is about? Alexander shook his head. But whatever it is, it's important enough for him to bypass doctor's orders. The door opened, revealing William Hartwell standing in the dimly lit study. Despite his frailty, he stood straighter, as if proximity to this private sanctuary had restored something essential in him. Come, he said simply. The study was a testament to a life of intellectual pursuit. Walls lined with books, a massive desk overlooking the lake, and framed photographs chronicling a family's history. But William led them past these personal artifacts to a hidden panel that slid open at his touch, revealing a small room dominated by a wall of monitors. What is this? Alexander asked, stunned. Truth, William answered, his fingers moving with surprising dexterity across a keyboard. The screens flickered to life, displaying security camera footage. Watch. The central monitor showed William's bedroom, date stamped 6 months ago, the night of his disappearance. The elderly man in the footage sat at the edge of his bed, grief evident in every line of his body. Then, unexpectedly, Victoria entered the room. The siblings' conversation unfolded without audio, but the body language told a disturbing story. Victoria appeared agitated, gesturing emphatically while her father sat motionless. She handed him papers which he refused to sign. The argument escalated until Victoria stormed out. William advanced the footage. Hours later, his recorded self rose suddenly, as if struck by a realization. He moved with purpose, retrieving Eleanor's pocket watch before leaving the room. You remembered something, Grace observed quietly. William nodded, advancing to footage from his study. This very room. The cameras showed him accessing hidden files, downloading information to a small device, then concealing it inside the pocket watch itself. Eleanor discovered irregularities. William explained, his speech growing clearer with each word. Before her death, financial manipulations, Victoria's signature, offshore accounts. Alexander paled. Father, are you saying Victoria was embezzling from the company? Worse, William replied. Northside project, land acquired, local families, paid to leave. Then Victoria, diverted funds, sold land to Richardson's development group, luxury condos instead. Massive profit. That's why you canceled Mother's project, Alexander realized, horror dawning on his face. Not because it was unprofitable, but because Victoria had already secretly sold the land. William nodded grimly. Eleanor found out. Confrontation, Stress caused stroke. His voice broke. Killed her. The implications hung in the air like a physical presence. Eleanor Hartwell had discovered her daughter's betrayal, a scheme that undermined everything she valued, and the confrontation had triggered the stroke that killed her. The night I disappeared, William continued, remembered where Eleanor kept evidence. Victoria came, wanted signatures, transfer ownership, cover tracks. He touched the pocket watch tenderly, took evidence instead. Then, nothing. Mind broke. Grace understood now. You were trying to protect your wife's legacy. Even when your mind couldn't remember why, some part of you held on to that purpose. William's eyes filled with tears. Park bench, near where Eleanor first proposed Northside project, 20 years ago. Subconscious remembered. Significance. Alexander looked devastated. Does Victoria know you have this evidence? Suspects, William answered. Why she wanted. Study access. Why I removed her. Today. He turned to Grace, his expression solemn. You found me, when I was lost. Showed kindness, without agenda. He reached for her hand. Need your help. One more time. What can I do? Grace asked. William pressed the pocket watch into her palm. Evidence inside? Microchip. Take to Detective Reyes. Your choice. When? Give me time. Confront Victoria first. The weight of the watch felt enormous in Grace's hand. Heavier than gold. Heavier than the billions it could affect. Why me? Why not Alexander? Alexander. Family. Conflicted. You see clearly. Moral compass. Like Eleanor. Alexander stepped forward. Father, we should consider all options. This could destroy Victoria, the company. Justice, William interrupted firmly. For Eleanor. For families. Displaced. Victoria's choice. Led here. Grace looked down at the watch, then back to William. I'll do what's right, she promised. 3 days later, Grace sat on the familiar park bench, the place where it had all begun. The morning was bright, Chicago's skyline gleaming in the distance. The detective's card was in one pocket, the watch in the other. Her decision had been made. I thought I might find you here. Grace looked up to see William approaching, walking with a cane but considerably stronger than when she'd first encountered him. How did Victoria take it? She asked as he sat beside her. Denied, then threatened. Then, William sighed, broke down. Finally, truth emerged. And now? Resignation, quiet investigation, restitution to families, affected by scheme. William looked out at the lake. Richardson, cooperating, implicating others. You're protecting her from prosecution, Grace observed. William nodded slowly. Justice comes. Many forms. Victoria lost trust, position, reputation, must earn, redemption, like I earned, survival, through your kindness. They sat in comfortable silence, the months of wordless companionship having created an understanding between them that transcended conventional relationships. The Northside project? Grace asked finally. A smile touched William's lips. Revived. Alexander leading, with community input. Your son, Darius, offered medical clinic position. When he graduates. Grace turned to him, surprised. You contacted my son? Future partnership, William said simply. Your kindness. Saved more than me. Saved Eleanor's dream. Justice served. Through creation, not destruction. Grace thought about the check she had finally accepted. About Darius's incredulous joy when she'd told him his loans were paid off. About the small house she would soon own instead of clean. What now? She asked. Now, William said, his blue eyes clear and purposeful. We build. Together. He reached for her hand and Grace took it. Not as maid and billionaire, not as rescuer and rescued, but as two souls connected by the simplest and most profound of human gestures. Kindness freely given, with no expectation of return. Across the park, construction equipment was already assembling at the Northside location. New foundations would soon be laid. For buildings, for a community, for a legacy of compassion that would outlast them all. Grace Thompson looked at the man beside her, at the city before them, at the future unfolding from a single moment of humanity on a rainy afternoon. Together, she agreed. And in that word was everything. Redemption, purpose, and the quiet revolution that begins when one person sees another not for their circumstances, but for their inherent worth. The watch in her pocket would be returned to its rightful place. Its evidence no longer needed to force justice, but preserved as a reminder that time, in the end, had indeed been their friend. Subscribe to The Maid's Secret to discover more powerful tales where humility meets justice, and ordinary hearts change extraordinary lives.